Hey everyone, thank you for joining the Tara Palmeri Show and the Red Letter for everyone who is watching this on Substack right now. This is a great treat. I am speaking to Andrew Lownie. He is a journalist based in the UK, and he is a biographer of Prince Andrew. He had a book that came out earlier this year, a few months ago, about the Duke and Duchess of York. That's Prince Andrew and his wife, Fergie. You know her as Sarah Ferguson. She's often known as Fergie in the US. And as with everything related to the Epstein story, there is scandal all over it, right? Before Andrew Lownie's book was even released in the US, HarperCollins had to make edits to it. Let me tell you what I found in the bookseller. HarperCollins confirms editing several passages of Andrew Lownie's best-selling Prince Andrew biography. And this came reportedly after Melania Trump threatened to sue Hunter Biden because of connections he made between Melania and Jeffrey Epstein. Hopefully our author will jump on the line and explain that even further himself. But, there has been a lot of news right now out of the UK. And by the way, for everyone who wants to, to read this book, it's called Untold, The Rise and Fall of the House of York. And it's a part of a trilogy. Andrew Lownie has been, he's a British historian, and he's an author of books about the royal family. And he's really zeroed in on Prince Andrew and has alleged that the royal family has allowed someone who has conducted in criminal behavior. As we know, he had to settle a civil settlement with Virginia Giuffre over alleged sexual abuse. And so this is a huge deal. He lost some of his royal titles, but not all of them. He still holds on to a number of royal titles. But the book really goes into deep detail into the friendship between Jeffrey Epstein and Prince Andrew and his wife, Sarah Ferguson, the Duchess of York. Now, the reason that I reached out to Andrew is also because someone just so happened to be sitting next to him at a dinner table and said, Tara, why don't you reach out to him? There's always some scandal around the Epstein story and this book. And, he actually had to have passages from his book edited. And so I think that's a really big deal that publishers are so afraid right now. They're so stifled by free speech, not just ABC News, not just the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, which have to deal with lawsuits from the White House, from Trump himself. That also applied to ABC and CBS, which settled with President Trump. But book publishers like HarperCollins, a book published in the UK, they are afraid of freedom of speech in the US. And that is why parts of Andrew's book had to be edited out. And the only way for you to read it is for you to go to the UK yourself. Now we have our guest on the line. I know there are some difficulties. Thanks so much, Andrew, for joining.
Not at all. Pleasure. Nice to talk to you. I'm sorry about the technical difficulties, but
it's all good. Thank you for joining. I gave our listeners a little bit of a briefing on your work. This latest book, Untitled, is a part of a trilogy, that you're a historian and that you've been, doing extensive. How many interviews did you do for this book, by the way? I just got into it last night and it's fascinating.
Gosh, well, I did quite a lot when the book first came out in August, and then we've had clearly a flurry of interviews since yesterday because of the revelations with Fergie. So I don't know, I've probably done 20 since yesterday.
Oh, no, I mean interviews for the book. Like, how many did you do? And
Well, I would think probably about 300 in the end. All the people I managed to identify, and I've continued. I had 2 interviews yesterday, lunch with someone who had been an ambassador, and somebody who worked in the palace I had a coffee with yesterday. So the research continues. And in fact, many people come forward since the book came out, willing to talk, or not really, people I hadn't actually been able to trace. So it's been very exciting.
Yeah, that is always the interesting part about doing journalism, is once the piece is published, how many people see what you've been working on, and then they come forward and start talking to you. And then I'm sure it will lead to the next book. But I do, before we even get started, I was talking about how parts of your book were edited for the United States. And so can you tell our listeners in the US what parts of the book were edited? What did they allege, and why they were removed before publishing in the US?
Well, actually, they're edited in for Britain. There was some stuff on. It was all mainly Trump. It was talked about how Epstein had basically had a relationship with Melania before Trump. In fact, Trump had first made love to Melania on one of Epstein's aircraft. And Trump didn't like that. There was also conversations between Trump and Andrew, which came from someone at the consulate, British consulate, about how they just did locker room talk. And Trump went after the News Corps, and they decided, though I was very willing to stand my stuff up. I went back and checked my sources, absolutely accurate. But everyone was folding in front of Trump. The Daily Beast, I think, did something. Clearly, the Wall Street Journal, which is part of News Corps, had bended the knee. And I think the feeling by the lawyers was it was easier just to take the stuff out rather than have a fight, which was really took us away from the essential story.
And there were other connections to
time-consuming,
Epstein.
Expensive, and so that was fine. So that came out of the British edition.
Yeah, and there was another connection between Melania and Epstein, right, in the book?
No, I think those were the two bits. It was, I think that was the main two things, and then Harry popped up claiming that he hadn't had a fight with Andrew, and again we just took that out. It was an incidental thing, which was put in at the last minute, really, because out of a curiosity by my editor. So those are the only changes. But by that stage, I think about 60,000 copies have been printed. So it's not exactly a secret, and I suspect there are an awful lot of people who've read it and probably would have passed over it if Trump hadn't drawn attention to it.
Yeah, it's just it's a wild moment that we're living in right now. As someone who has been a historian for so many years, did you ever think that this would happen to your work?
Well, they're always, you always have to make concessions. I mean, clearly it's more difficult with a living person.
Right.
I mean, there are all sorts of rules of privacy and libel there.
Right.
And I think, much more difficult, particularly with royals. People are not talking on the record. They're often NDAs. So it does make it much more difficult to, with documents, though they're not always accurate, at least you've got documents you can quote. So this was a departure for me. Normally I do work with documents, but there are no documents now. Everything's closed. I tried to get access to the files on Andrew as a trade envoy, which should be public. And so it's a very different book to the ones I've written in the past. And clearly you're one's touching on very sensitive subjects. I mean, this kind of, goes to the heart of the royal family and argues that there's corruption, amongst some very senior royals.
Yeah, I do want to get into that, but first I want to talk about the latest news. These leaked emails, they just seem to keep dribbling out, and I think everyone is sort of wondering how these emails are leaking. I mean, do you think it's a hacker? Do you think it's the Epstein estate? The latest email, just for everyone, is. It shows that Sarah Ferguson, known as Fergie, the former judge, she keeps the title Duchess of York, right? After their divorce, she was Prince Andrew's wife. That she apologized to Jeffrey Epstein after she publicly called him a pedophile and regretted having any sort of relationship with him. She went so far in her apology that she called him a supreme friend. And for people who are unaware of this news, I'm gonna read off what exactly she said to him in her apology. This is after Jeffrey Epstein spent time incarcerated for procuring a minor for prostitution. Okay. He was a sex offender. I know you feel hellaciously let down by me from what you either what you were either told or read, and I must humbly apologize to you and your heart for that. I did not, absolutely not say the P word. She means pedophile. And I saw all my children's work disappearing. So basically she's apologizing because she said she was worried that her children's work would disappear, and she's an author of children's books, right? So this was, obviously, and in these emails, she kisses up to him even more, calling him a supreme friend weeks after she disavowed him publicly. I mean, what do you make of all of this?
Well, I mean, I had this material actually. I mean, you raised a lot of interesting questions, and in fact, I was able today to do a piece in the papers here showing how she continued to actually stay at Epstein Properties for several years after she claimed to cut out all contact. Where these emails are coming from is a good question. I mean, we've had 18,000 that Bloomberg had, which led, I think, to Peter Mandelson, the British ambassador to the States, being sacked, and now these disclosures about Sarah Ferguson. So it could be hackers, it could be the estate. It's a mystery, but it's certainly giving legs to the whole story. And if this drip goes on, then clearly we've got some big revelations coming. I don't buy Sarah Ferguson's sort of explanation. Here is someone who claimed that she was being threatened with defamation by Epstein and she was scared of him. And yet, as you say, she's writing to him in pretty effusive and friendly terms. And I'm afraid what I found with my research was that what she did in public and what she did in private were very different. And she thought she'd probably get away with this. And it just points up to the sort of double standards and cynicism which she operates. I mean, she's been championing various children's charities. And yet, as you say, she seems to be turning a blind eye to a man who was abusing young women. And she must have seen what was going on. She stayed on a regular basis at the Epstein homes. She couldn't have been unaware of what was happening. And I'm just amazed that the authorities haven't called her in for questioning as a material witness.
I believe and this was also after Virginia Giuffre made the allegations against her ex-husband, right? This email was sent.
I'm not aware of exactly when Jeffrey made the allegations against her husband. I thought it was more recently.
She made the allegations in 2010.
2010, really? Gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think as we begin to look at the timeline and we begin to get these releases, then the whole thing looks much murkier than people realized. I mean, one of the things that both Andrew and Sarah did was they kind of laundered their reputation by professing to be supporters of these children's charities. Andrew actually was a spokesperson for something called the NCCC, which is a British charity for the prevention of cruelty to children, and yet here they were. Certainly Andrew involved himself with abusing young women. There was material which I couldn't put in the book, but about 15-year-old girls, for example. Everyone dismisses him, saying Virginia Giuffre was 17, it was fine. But actually there were much younger girls. And I suspect there is more to come out, when and if the Epstein files come out and they haven't been too heavily weeded, that may give us some new leads there.
Where do you think these emails are coming from again?
Well, I don't know. I think the two things that you suggest, the Epstein estate and some sort of hacking, is possible. Has stuff been shown to Congress and someone in Congress is leaking it? I mean, what was interesting is that the Fergie material was shared between the Sun and the Mail on Sunday. The woman on the Sun who's credited is Daphne Barrack, who previously had done an interview with Ghislaine in prison, was actually mooted at one point to be ghosting Andrew's memoirs. So someone with clearly very good connections to the Yorks. But clearly this is not a leak that's been very helpful to them. So there's stories that the palace are fanning this story, that they're actually basically hanging Sarah Ferguson out to dry as a way of protecting Andrew, which seems to me a rather strange theory, because all that's going to happen is just draw more attention to the Yorks. And if material comes out in Andrew, they'll just people go after Andrew as well. So who knows? But the story is developing each day, and we may have some answers soon.
So in your book, you write that Andrew and Fergie borrowed from Epstein. They borrowed money. How much do you think they may have borrowed from Jeffrey Epstein?
Well, the figure I was told was £2 million. I certainly don't believe the figure of £15,000. That wasn't. They didn't deal, either of them, in such low sums. So
that's what they admitted to. They admitted to £15,000, to be clear. Correct.
Yes, they admitted to £15,000, and also it wasn't clear what the money was for. Was it to pay Johnny O'Sullivan's tuition? Was it to pay his wages? Was it to pay Kate Waddington, the PR woman's wages? Was it to pay other debts? Was money paid to the children? She talks about thanking him for supporting her family. She has a lot of questions to answer, and she's clearly being very silent at the moment, which I would argue is pretty suspicious.
Okay. I wanted to ask you also about how and when were Sarah Ferguson and Prince Andrew first introduced to Jeffrey Epstein? I mean, Prince Andrew said it was through Ghislaine Maxwell, right? But you write that they've known each other for much longer than people think or know. Can you sort of give us a timeline of their friendship?
Well, it's very difficult. So a friend of Ghislaine who talked to me, who said that it was the 1980s when Ghislaine was at Oxford. Wow. I think it's very unlikely because they were in different circles. Ghislaine herself said in the interview she did recently that it was Sarah Ferguson who introduced her to Andrew, and that makes much more sense. Sarah Ferguson and Ghislaine were sort of big figures in the expatriate community in New York in the mid 1990s, I'd say, and that makes much more sense. But until none of them are actually people that you can really always believe what they say, and they're each case trying to shift to each other. The line from Alistair Watson, who was Andrew's private secretary, writing to the Times, was that Andrew met Epstein in 1991. That was the line that Steve Hoffenberg also put, who was one of the people involved in Epstein's Ponzi scheme and went to prison for it. So, but in the 1990s, Andrew was still in the Navy. He did have long periods where he was out and about. I found he was operating in Kazakhstan for a time, for example. But there are no real references to Andrew and Epstein, certainly in newspapers or even talking to people. So there's a bit of a gap there. But there certainly were emerging in the late 1990s. We have Andrew on the Lolita Express in the beginning of 1999. But, again, it's unlikely he would be going to spend time on the island if they'd only just met. So it suggests that the relationship had been going on a little bit of time. And certainly Sarah Ferguson had been on the Lolita Express in 1998. So, we need more information.
Wow, that's interesting that she would have been on the Lolita Express before him, right?
Yeah. I think it was only to Miami or somewhere. So it's still unclear whether she went to the island. We know that she went to the house in Manhattan. We know that she stayed in the flats with Mark Epstein owned around the corner. We know that she went to the Palm Beach home. But again, I have no evidence that she went to the ranch. And the people who would know are clearly keeping quiet. Unfortunately, the staff who work there.
Right. I like this passage that you write in the book. You say that Andrew was easy prey for a rattlesnake like Epstein. Epstein played Andrew. The prince was a useful idiot who gave him respectability, access to political leaders, and business opportunities. He found him easy to exploit. And you said that Andrew was his Super Bowl trophy. And this was someone that you're quoting, Stephen Hoffenberg, who was Epstein's former partner in a massive Ponzi scheme. It was a $400 million Ponzi scheme. And so it's interesting that you wrote that. So what was the nature of their relationship? How would you describe it to people?
Well, I mean, what Andrew gave Epstein was respectability and status. I mean, he was invited to Buckingham Palace, to Sandringham, to Balmoral. And I think Epstein had this belief that he was actually going to, be some sort of financial advisor to the Queen and other members of the family. So, and Andrew, of course, also gave Epstein very useful contacts. He'd been the trade envoy for 10 years between 2001 and 2011. And for Andrew, Epstein offered, again, contacts for people he might not have been in touch with, and he admitted that in his Newsnight interview. He offered him a ready supply of young women, and he offered him basically someone who would pay a lot of Fergie's debts. So, it was a mutually beneficial relationship for the two of them, and they were very close. I mean, I think I quote saying that they were sort of best buddies. They were both sex addicts. I mean, I think Epstein said that Andrew was even kinkier than he was. So they were sort of blood brothers in many ways, in the way that Epstein was very close to Trump. Same sort of interests, money and women.
Wow. And just for everyone who's maybe hasn't been following the Fergie story, I found that a few people on my team didn't even know who she was. Why did she have so many debts? Can you kind of explain her story? She sort of fell into disrepute in the UK, like Prince Andrew, and then had to go to the US to launder her reputation. And maybe you can tell people about that.
Yeah. So Sarah Ferguson separated from the Duke in 1992. They got divorced in 1996. She had to sort of, though she was actually given quite a generous settlement, much more generous than she claims. She was a very extravagant person, had extensive staff, had expensive rents. She traveled on Concorde. She was always buying things. She stayed in expensive hotels, though had expensive holidays. And so very quickly she fell into debt, and she needed people to pay off those debts. And she had a whole series of either rich boyfriends or people who were brought in to try and help her with these debts. And I think clearly she was vulnerable to someone like Epstein, who had plenty of money and was prepared to give her money. I mean, a lot of these things were meant to be loans, but she never, of course, repaid them. So, she was in some ways one of the vulnerabilities for Andrew. I mean, Andrew, I think, came in December 2010 to persuade Epstein to pay off some more of her debts. The Queen had paid off millions of pounds. Then she got fed up paying her out. And I think there were other businessmen. A man called David Tang, who's now dead, was supposed to have paid a lot of debts. So, she was a real liability. But she saw that were easy pickings here. But as you're right, she came to the States. She relaunched herself. She was seen as a bit of a hero, that she had fought against the palace establishment, that she presented herself as a victim, went on Oprah, made a lot of money.
I know someone who's done that before, Meghan Markle.
Well, exactly. I mean, Meghan Markle could learn a lot from Fergie. I mean, she's...
Yeah, right.
Fergie's been a much more successful Meghan Markle. But lots and lots of parallels, and of course lots of parallels between Harry and Andrew as well. The same, structure of the military, which had kept them on the straight and narrow, being abandoned when they broke loose, both marrying women which were totally unsuitable and led them into real problems. Both very stupid men who didn't always follow the advice they were given. So very interesting parallels there. So, but Fergie, to her credit, did relaunch herself. She did make large sums of money, but the problem is she was never making enough money to cover her overheads.
Yeah. Just for people who have just joined the live, I want to tell everyone the name of this book. It is entitled The Rise and Fall of the House of York. I'm told that you actually can't buy it in the US right now. Is that true?
No, the background to it is I had a major US publisher who was due to publish exactly the same time as the William Collins edition. And they pulled the book a few weeks before publication without really giving any proper justification. And I was forced to self-publish the book as the only way to get it out at the same time through Amazon. So you can get the hardback or the ebook, and there is actually an audio done by Blackstone. But the problem was that I'm not very technical. I was given a corrupted file by the British publisher. And as a result, the edition that came out, which has been corrected, and I hope there are no more problems, wasn't formatted properly. So the book is there. I think you can also buy the British edition. I think it's slightly more expensive, but actually it's a lovely edition with full color pictures, 4 sets of plates, I think over 60 pages of pictures. So, I mean, that's the one to buy. So it shouldn't be impossible through third-party sellers to get the book.
And this book, by the way, already had to be edited.
But there have been attempts to frustrate this book in the States.
Yeah, this book already had to be edited because of what you wrote about Melania Trump in the book and Epstein.
Yes, well, that request came several weeks after the book came out. So there are a lot of copies out there from the first edition, which before Collins changed it. So it was a pretty pointless gesture. But yes, the book should be should be fine now. If anyone's got any problems, they can get it refunded and replaced. And I am talking about the possibility of bringing out another edition, either next summer, updated, or even as soon as sometime before Christmas, because the events are moving so quickly. I've got so much new information that the book, I wouldn't say is out of date, but there is a lot more that can be added to it now, given what's been emerging.
And you mentioned that you have a lot of photos in your book in the UK version. So President Trump denied knowing Prince Andrew, but you say that there is extensive photographic evidence, and you write about Prince Andrew's trip to Mar-a-Lago. Can you describe the relationship between Prince Andrew and President Trump and this visit to Mar-a-Lago, and just how long their relationship goes?
Yeah, well, the relationship, I think the pictures in Mar-a-Lago 2000, it's a relationship that continues to this day. He could have even gone to the state banquet the other night. I mean, he was certainly involved in Trump's previous trip here. And it revolved around basically playing golf. Andrew would play golf with him. When Trump came to Britain, Andrew was designated as the sort of royal to deal with him. But they, would turn, for example, talk about Trump's Tanbury golf course, which he was keen to develop. And Andrew actually is the Earl of Inverness, which is that part of Scotland where the Tanbury is. It was a very close relationship. They had these locker room conversations where they would swap the masseur lists of who they recommended. They would talk business. I suspect there were business opportunities that they discussed. Andrew would have met him clearly in his work as a royal, as a trade envoy. So it was a pretty close relationship. I mean, a real buddy-buddy relationship. In Mar-a-Lago, Andrew met all sorts of women there through Trump. Some woman who he met there, he actually was supposedly have taken to the island.
Oh, okay.
One of them is a woman called Geraldine Beck. And so, yeah, very, very close connections. I mean, Trump is trying to distance himself, as he is from a lot of his connections with Epstein. But the three of them were real chums.
Okay, so they were friends. I wanted to ask you a little bit more about the win-win situation in the friendship between Epstein and Andrew, and how Ghislaine Maxwell facilitated introductions between Andrew, Epstein, and very powerful people, and how even the Queen benefited from this.
Yes, well, I mean, Andrew picked up some useful contacts as a trade envoy. He was taking Epstein on some of these trips. We don't know exactly which trips because all the files are still closed. But he was taken to royal residences. We don't know if he met the Queen, but he certainly hoped to meet the Queen and thought he would act, as I say, as her business advisor. And again, there are so many gaps in the story. It's difficult to know exactly what was going on. But it's clear that the two of them were helping each other in terms of their business projects. Epstein was clearly, Andrew was in New York a lot, often staying with Epstein. He would take him to the consulate. He would take him to meetings that were being set up for trade opportunities. So, I mean, big advantages to Epstein to have his link with Andrew. And of course, Epstein was flying Andrew all over the place, as we know from the Lolita Express. But the Queen certainly supported what Andrew was doing. I mean, she was entertaining some of these despots with whom he seemed to have business relationships, particularly in the Central Asian republics like Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan. And these were places I suspect that Epstein went. I mean, this was the Wild West. There were big opportunities for oil and gas. And I suspect that Epstein was involved there. But until we have more openness about royal finances, particularly Andrew's finances, which were all offshore through nominee accounts, He had a Chinese bank account. It's very difficult to know exactly what was happening between the two of them.
Was it possible that Andrew was passing on information too for Epstein and Ghislaine to various intelligence agencies, or the other way around, where Epstein and Ghislaine took information from Andrew and the dignitaries and the world leaders that spend time with him, and then passed that information on to intelligence agencies? Is there any sort of connection between the intelligence world and this friendship?
Yes, I mean that's what I understand. I mean, several people. So there were plenty of honey traps with Andrew. He was caught, filmed in bed with women, possibly women he shouldn't, younger women. We know that Epstein did that. I mean, we know the tapes were picked up by the FBI, and Mark Dugan took some of them away to Russia. I had a contact in Russia, a man called Tim Riley, who talks about the compromat the Russians had. This is a man with strong intelligence links. There was a Kazakhstan businessman who said it was standard practice for the Kazakh intelligence services to film people, to offer the prostitutes and then to film them. And certainly my contacts said that the intelligence agencies in the Middle East, and particularly Mossad, but also Libya, China, and other countries would certainly have had compromat on Andrew. What he was able to give is difficult to know. I mean, he worked in the Ministry of Defense. He would have picked up, he could have lunch or dinner with anyone he wanted. He could have picked up information. And we know that Epstein traded in information. That was, one of the things he did. So it's very likely that Andrew either wittingly or unwittingly gave information to Epstein, which he was able to pass on to intelligence agencies and governments and people who shouldn't have had this information.
Do you think Epstein was passing on information to multiple intelligence agencies and like the FBI, MI6, Mossad, and that's why they all found him to be useful? He was sort of like this hyper fixer type guy who could just gave information to everyone, and that's how he remained protected.
Yes, I think that's very likely.
Yeah.
He would have been a very useful contact for all of them. He would have certainly been debriefed, even if he wasn't, on the books. He would have been a very useful asset for them, and they may well have tasked him with jobs to get information from people. I mean, his range of contacts was extraordinary, ranging from prime ministers. He was close to Tony Blair. He was pretty close to Mandelson, who was a very important figure at the time in British politics. We had Ehud Barak and others. So, it makes sense that they would contact Epstein, and Epstein realized that he could trade this information for use for favors. And clearly, if he compromised people, then that put him in an even stronger position.
I did a podcast on this. I had some reporting about his bodyguard, Igor Zinoviev, Epstein's bodyguard, Igor Zinoviev, going to Langley, the CIA headquarters, and spending time there while Epstein was incarcerated, while he was spending time in the prison in 2008, county jail. And he took a binder from the CIA and brought it back with a note to Jeffrey Epstein. And we know that Jeffrey Epstein had various meetings with Burns, who was the Deputy Secretary of State at the time. And we know the State Department and CIA often work very closely together. So there are a number of connections. I reached out to the CIA and I asked them, you have a log of everyone who has ever entered Langley. Do you have a log? Do you have Igor Zinoviev in that log? And they just never got back to me. I mean, we had many exchanges of emails. We spoke over the phone, but they just refused to tell me. I think it would have been a very easy yes or no question. Did this person enter the grounds? And this is all information I obtained through a lawyer for Jeffrey Epstein, a lawyer for one of the victims, Brad Edwards, who's very well known, who spoke to this bodyguard, Igor Zinoviev, who I've tried to reach out to, but I've been told from other journalists who speak to him that he was credible, but he's gone underground. So yeah, there is a lot of different angles going on here. Do you think there are any other intelligence angles that we might be missing when it comes to this relationship between the Crown and Epstein?
Well, I know that British intelligence were certainly monitoring Andrew. In fact, they were monitoring Sarah Ferguson and some of her connections. She had connections with a Texan called Steve Wyatt, whose father was involved in trading oil during the Iran-Iraq War. So, I mean, they were clearly keeping an eye there on Wyatt. I suspect they were watching her and others. And certainly the police protection officers would have been doing that. There would have been liaison with the intelligence services. But we also know, I also know from some of the people I've talked to, that they were watching Andrew and his activities in the Central Asian republics. They were concerned about the people he was engaging with, and actually there's a story of him taking a $5 million bribe from someone in Kazakhstan, and the intelligence services reporting this to the British authorities, and in fact to the royal household, and nothing actually being done about it. So, I mean, they're clearly. I think there's a bigger picture here, and all we can do is begin to try and put bits of the jigsaw together. But there's still large parts of this jigsaw which need some more pieces. But it's clearly a much bigger operation than I think people have realized. And I'm surprised that more names haven't come out. I mean, it's always the same names. So it's this story has a long way still to run, I think.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. It's amazing that the Crown would know about this, but it seems like he was being controlled by just a very simple honeypot operation. I mean, do you think that Vladimir Putin was involved in some ways in this? Because this seems very KGB.
Well, the KGB had trained the Central Asian republics, so absolutely. Okay. I mean, they would have known everything that was going on in the Central Asian republics, which he spent a lot of time in, and I know he was entertained, by prostitutes and girls who were brought to him. I think Putin. We know that Mark Dugan seems to pass some of this FBI material to a very close associate of Putin, so it will be. Putin could see it if he wished. So yeah, there's a lot of compromising material, and one of the mysteries is the stuff hasn't surfaced yet. But maybe that we're now beginning to get these email leaks. Maybe we'll begin to get various pictures. But it sounds like whatever pressure was being put on, let's say Andrew, seems to have meant that this stuff hasn't come out. That he somehow has provided whatever information they wanted. So as long as he pays ball, maybe the stuff won't come out.
Yeah. I guess I wanted to ask you a little bit more about the photograph of Virginia Giuffre. Do you know more about that, the circumstances of how the Crown tried to cover that up, how they said it was doctored? I mean, what was the reaction when that photo came out? I'd like to just know more about like the PR around that. I just feel like the royal family has botched every moment of this in terms of public relations. And
yeah, of course they have. Well, I mean, they maintain, and they have various sort of acolytes who maintain that this is a fake document. But I think I go into it in some detail in the book. I mean, I show that Virginia Giuffre was tracked down by Sharon Churcher, a journalist who found her. I mean, Virginia Giuffre had gone underground. The photographer who went and took these pictures, Michael Thomas, talks about them literally being pulled out of a shelf. There were various copies that he made. He photographed them front and back. He had the Walmart sign on the back. Everything fits with all the logistics of her going there. The fact that she took it into Walmart 3 days later. It wasn't possible even when the story broke to forge documents like this. Forensic experts looked at the pictures.
Yeah, we didn't have photoshopping like that then, right?
Exactly. Now, the original was taken to the FBI, and that one is the one that's so-called missing. But the FBI certainly must have done their own tests and haven't disputed it. I also talked to a woman who hasn't appeared in the story, I think, from any other writer, a woman called Sandra White, who was sent as a Mail on Sunday journalist, actually a friend of mine, to mine Virginia Giuffre, spent weeks with her, said she was an entirely genuine person. I mean, none of this was made up.
Yeah, she was a lovely person. I spent a lot of time with her as well. She was very credible, incredible. Yeah. I think actually she held back a lot of what she knows, to be honest.
Yes, will it be very interesting?
She feared that people wouldn't. Her life was so horrific. I think she feared people wouldn't believe her if they knew everything.
Well, let's hope, some of that stuff may have found its way into her book, because, clearly, a lot of pressure was put on her. But, that's exactly, everyone says who's worked with her. We owe her a lot, because without Virginia Giuffre, most of the story wouldn't have come out.
No.
And, she paid a heavy price for her openness. But, Sandro says, that she got to know her. This was all entirely genuine. And, these people, Victoria Harvey and others, make all sorts of claims without any evidence, and all ridiculous things about how the picture was doctored. So and the case against Andrew and even just against Virginia Giuffre and Andrew, depends on so many other factors apart from the photograph. There's email correspondence with Andrew and Ghislaine discussing how they deal with Virginia Giuffre. This is the person they claim never to, had any contact with. Met.
Right. It was all over the flight log. So.
Yeah, well, exactly. We have the stuff there. So, and the other witnesses have come forward. We've there's just so much evidence that supports her story that couldn't have been put together and faked. It would have taken a giant conspiracy. No one has ever seen the picture that is supposed to have been used to do the fake picture. And Andrew and Ghislaine have repeatedly been shown to lie. So who are you going to believe? Virginia Giuffre, who clearly got some facts wrong, in a highly traumatized way, working with a ghostwriter who perhaps didn't understand the full story, remembering things that happened many years before when she was pretty traumatized, and these two characters who brought in PR firms to try and denigrate and discredit Giuffre. For anyone looking at it in an outside in a reasonably dispassionate way, it's pretty clear that there's absolutely no case to be made. Jay Beecher, I understand, is going to produce a book, but a lot of this stuff is focused on things that no one disputes, that Virginia Giuffre herself, having been a victim, was drawn in to the sort of Ponzi scheme for recruiting girls. So, there are no surprises there. And this was pretty standard practice. You compromise the people that you victimized.
Yeah. I didn't know about the book either. Who is it that's writing a book about her?
A guy called Jay Beecher, who's been doing lots of research. He has, I understand, an British intelligence background. He seems to be very close to the Maxwell family and a man called Brian Basham, who has a long history of representing as a PR man, the Maxwell family. So that there is an agenda
So it's
here.
going to be a piece. Yeah, it's going to be. I didn't have a doubt about that they would try to do that. I actually traveled around the country with Virginia and knocked on doors of people who were connected to her relationship with Epstein and her time there and the abuse. And I've seen up close what who this woman is, and sadly spoke to her before she died.
Because one of the one of the revelations of the book is the fact that there had been a major investigation into Andrew and Virginia Giuffre by a BBC program, not Newsnight, but Panorama. And the producer, Laura Burns, I don't know if you have met her, but she traveled around doing exactly what you were doing, in 2019, meeting people, interviewing them, doing an interview with Virginia herself, collecting documentation. A very thorough investigation. And this was the investigation that the Buckingham Palace wanted to shut down, which is why they kind of moved to Newsnight, who'd been asking for a completely different sort of interview, and agreed to go with them because they thought it would be a slightly easier gig. So, we remember, of course, Amy Robach and ABC, being told that if they, ran any investigation, they would not be given contact with the royal family. Big attempts to shut this story down for many years during which, Epstein and his merry men, abused many young girls. These people should, I have to say, look at their consciences again about, how they behaved and how they protected these men.
I just want to ask you before we wrap this up, and thank you so much for all of your time, by the way. I really appreciate it. And for everyone who just joined in late, I just want to give you the name of the book, entitled The Rise and Fall of the House of York. As we know, it is right now being self-published in the US. You can get it on Amazon. There were various hiccups in this, including a decision by the publisher to remove reference to Melania Trump and Jeffrey Epstein. So as with everything, there is pressure on publishers, on independent authors, and we are being held back all the time by lawfare, especially in this very litigious and this story with very powerful people involved. But I just want to ask you before we wrap up, do you think there's any other correspondence between Fergie and Epstein that might come to light or might just reveal the relationship that they had with Prince Andrew, the Crown, Sarah Ferguson herself? Like, do you think there's more that's going to come out in the Epstein files?
Absolutely, and I know there is. I mean, in fact, I'm in touch with a close friend of Sarah Ferguson's, who is I'm actually going to talk to you after we stop speaking, who has a lot of information about this and actually talks about criminal activity. So I'm going to have to find out more. But people are coming out of the woodwork. So. Who were involved in the story, know the principles. So absolutely. And I mean, even if the Epstein files have been weeded, I think there will be things there. There's still legal cases where material could be unsealed. Victims are prepared to give their stories to politicians to talk about them on the floor of the House. So I think there's a lot more still to come out. But the work of people like you, and that's why it's such an honor to talk to you. I mean, you've really opened up this whole story, and in some ways, it's great that we all talk to each other. We collaborate and share the bits of the puzzle that we've managed to find, because there is a lot. I think you would agree, still to uncover.
Yeah, no, this story is never ending. It really isn't. And you're right. It feels like we're grasping for bits, and that there is a trove underneath it all. We're just at the tip of the iceberg. And I think even our worst fears are likely even worse than you think. There are 1,000 victims, according to the FBI. How many do we really hear from? 20, maybe? Because the ones that were really young, they don't want to speak. It was so traumatizing for them.
Yeah, well, also a lot of them were people, young girls that were flown in from Russia who didn't even speak English, who've gone back. No one has any contact with them. And Thailand, exactly, a great center for all this. I mean, a lot of them are now married women with children, clearly don't want to revisit it. Yep. Some of the victims I've talked to are so traumatized they don't want to visit it. Right. They've sort of rebuilt their lives and kind of compartmentalized this. So, it's going to be very difficult to get stories. And of course, the police don't always treat victims in a very sympathetic way.
We just had the FBI director say he's never read the victims' testimonies. We just had the man who crafted Epstein's sweetheart deal say that of the 80-page prosecution memo that he was sent, recommending 60 indictment counts, that he did not read the victims' testimonies, but decided that he thought that they would not be able to stand up in court. It's disgusting.
Yes.
They want to hear from the victims. They just don't want to hear from them. That's just this is the world that we are in right now. These women are not credible. And this is where we are in this post-Me Too time, where the stories of women are just not credible, even though they have tons of women with identical stories. They are not credible to men. Those are the words of the FBI director. Not credible.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the great thing is that, they've tried to suppress this story, and each time, I mean, they're digging themselves in deeper and deeper, the authorities, because, people are coming forward. Yeah. Clearly, the witnesses who went to Capitol Hill were very credible. And I think the vast majority of the public, do want this swamp to be cleared. They do want justice for these women. They do want people to be brought to account for what has happened. And as you say, it is a huge, huge problem. And it can't be stemmed. I mean, I do feel myself the dam has been breached, and justice will be done.
I hope you're right. Thank you so much for your time, Andrew. And I hope everyone will go out and get his book, as hard as it is to get it. When we push through those barriers and we support independent journalists who have to self-publish to be published in the United States for a bestseller in the UK, we have to support those people. So go out there, buy his book, tell your friends about it. It's important that we support journalism. And thank you to everyone who is listening to the show. I appreciate it. You are keeping me able to continue on my work despite all of the, people who would like us to just go away.
Well, thank you. It's been a real privilege to talk to you.
Thanks so much. Have a great day. Okay. All right.
No, that was great. Thank you so much. And thank you for so kindly promoting the book, because it's had its